April 12, 2021. Cincinnati, Ohio. The sun was setting at 6:45 p.m., painting the sky orange and gold. Families were gathering for dinner, kids were laughing outside, and life moved forward as usual. But in a small upstairs apartment, one woman sat quietly at her kitchen table, staring at the flicker of a single candle stuck into a store-bought cupcake. It was her birthday. No balloons. No phone calls. Not even a knock on the door. Just silence. She checked her phone again, scrolling through her contacts, her thumb hovering as if someone might reach out first. No one did. Imagine that for a moment. Your special day, the one day you hope not to be forgotten, passing by as if it didn't matter. She whispered to herself, "Happy birthday," her own voice the only sound in the room. What she couldn't know, as she blew out that candle, was that this night wouldn't end the way it started. Because someone she had never met was about to show up at her door, and their knock would change her life forever. Her name was Sarah, 32 years old, working long shifts at a local diner where regulars knew her smile but few knew her story. April 12th had started like any other Monday. She got up early, walked to work with her worn-out sneakers hitting the cracked sidewalks, and told herself it was just another day. At the diner, she poured coffee, cleared plates, and wished strangers well. Not one person realized it was her birthday. She never mentioned it. By the time her shift ended, her body ached, her tips were light, and her phone was still without a single message. She stopped by a corner store on the way home and bought herself a cupcake and a single candle, placing both in a small paper bag. That was her gift to herself. Back inside her apartment, the evening felt heavy. The walls carried only silence, the kind that makes a person aware of every tick of the clock. Outside, neighbors talked on balconies, couples strolled hand in hand, and somewhere in the building, laughter carried through thin walls. For Sarah, there was none of that. She set the cupcake down on her kitchen table, lit the candle, and stared at it for a long time. 32 years of life, and on this day, she felt invisible. Yet even in that loneliness, she sat up straight, almost forcing herself to hold on to a sense of worth. She thought, maybe tomorrow would be different. What she couldn't know was that tomorrow wouldn't have to wait. The night itself was about to change. By 8:47 that evening, Sarah had given up on waiting for a call or a text. She curled up on her couch with an old blanket, the tiny flame from the candle flickering across the room, shadows stretching along the walls. The cupcake sat untouched, its frosting beginning to soften. She let out a tired sigh and whispered to herself, "Happy birthday, Sarah," the words sounding hollow in the empty space. Then, 3 sharp knocks broke the silence. She froze. No one ever visited her. Slowly, she stood, the floorboards creaking under her feet, and moved toward the door. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the handle, uncertain of what waited on the other side. Another knock followed, firmer this time, as if whoever stood there wasn't leaving. Sarah pulled the door open just enough to see a man she had never met before. He stood under the dim hallway light, holding a small paper bag in one hand and a folded envelope in the other. His face carried a mix of nervousness and kindness, and his voice was gentle when he spoke. "I'm sorry to bother you, but are you Sarah?" Her heart pounded. She hadn't heard her name spoken all day, not once, until this moment. Everything about that night shifted with the sound of a stranger's voice at her door. Sarah hesitated, her hands still gripping the doorframe, unsure if she should invite him in or send him away. The man introduced himself softly. "My name's Daniel. I live just down the hall." He lifted the small paper bag, the kind you'd find from a local bakery, and added, "I know this might seem odd, but I couldn't help overhearing the phone call earlier. I didn't mean to listen, but I heard enough to know it's your birthday." Sarah blinked, caught between embarrassment and disbelief. Daniel extended the bag toward her, his expression earnest. Inside was a small chocolate cake with a single candle tucked carefully beside it, along with the folded envelope he now held out. She took it slowly, her fingers brushing against the paper. "I thought no one should spend their birthday alone," he explained, his voice quiet yet steady, carrying no pity, just genuine care. For the first time that day, Sarah felt the sting of tears she had been holding back, not out of sadness, but from the sudden weight of being seen. She stepped back slightly, allowing him into the warm glow of her apartment. Daniel removed his jacket, setting it neatly on the chair, and as the candle flickered to life, the silence between them shifted into something different, unexpected, yet comforting. The evening was no longer just hers to endure. It had changed the moment he knocked. Sarah sat at the small table in her apartment, the glow from the single candle dancing against the faded walls. Across from her, Daniel leaned forward, smiling gently, waiting for her to make a wish. She hesitated, her eyes fixed on the flickering flame. For years, birthdays had been nothing more than quiet nights and unanswered phone calls. Now, a stranger sat in her home, turning what was once an empty evening into something entirely different. She finally closed her eyes and whispered a wish so softly, even she barely heard it, before blowing the candle out with a steady breath. Daniel clapped lightly, not out of formality, but with genuine warmth that made her laugh for the first time that night. They shared slices of the modest cake, the sweetness filling the room more than the taste itself. Daniel spoke of his childhood birthdays, messy with frosting and noise, and Sarah found herself telling stories she hadn't voiced in years. Memories of her mother singing, of a tiny house filled with laughter before life became lonelier. With each word, the space between them grew smaller, replaced with an unspoken understanding. The ticking clock on the wall seemed to fade into the background as time slipped by unnoticed. It wasn't a grand party, no balloons or gifts scattered across the floor, but it was real, human, and warm. For Sarah, it was the first time in a long while that her birthday didn't feel forgotten. As the hours passed, the candle melted down to nothing more than wax pooled on the table. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her laughter still lingering, when Daniel's expression shifted, softer, heavier. He looked down at his hands for a moment before speaking, his voice quieter now, almost as if he wasn't sure if he should share. He told her about a winter evening years ago, when he had walked into an empty apartment of his own. It was his birthday, and no one had called, no one had come. He described the way silence can weigh on a person, how it can feel louder than any crowd. Sarah listened without interrupting, her eyes locked on his, recognizing a reflection of her own life in his words. He explained that the reason he knocked on her door tonight wasn't random at all. He had noticed her alone earlier in the day, the same quiet he once knew written across her face. He didn't want her to feel the way he once had, forgotten on a day that should have meant something. His honesty filled the room with a different kind of silence, one that didn't feel empty but sacred. Sarah's chest tightened, not with sadness, but with a deep understanding. Two people who had once been strangers were now tied together by the simplest truth, that loneliness feels lighter when it's shared. Outside, the city continued on without them, but inside that small apartment, a bond was being formed that neither of them had expected when the day began. Midnight was nearing, and the last trace of Sarah's birthday was slipping away. The cake crumbs sat on the table, the dishes stacked in the sink, and the quiet glow of the lamps softened the room. Sarah looked around and realized something she hadn't expected. This was the first birthday in years that didn't feel empty. Daniel stood by the door, his coat in hand, ready to leave, but his steps lingered. He thanked her for letting him in, for sharing the night with him, and there was a warmth in his voice that carried the weight of everything unspoken. Sarah smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't just polite, but real, one that came from deep inside, where hope had been hiding for too long. She walked him to the door, and for a moment, neither of them moved, both understanding that the connection they had found wasn't meant to end with the night. Daniel gave a simple nod, one that promised he would be back, and Sarah's eyes softened in return. When the door closed, she stood in the quiet, but it was different now. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. She looked at the small calendar on the wall, the dates circled in red, and whispered to herself, "Maybe this year will be different." For the first time in a long time, her heart believed it. Her birthday had begun in loneliness, but it ended with something far greater, a reminder that kindness, even from a stranger, can turn an ordinary night into the start of something new.